What's going on, guys? Buenos dias, good morning, how are you? Let's jump right into this one. For those of you that have been watching for many years, welcome back. This may be a little different style vlog than you're used to. For those of you that may be new here, my name's Sean Murphy. I own therelocationist.com. I make videos like this one to give people a more in-depth look into the realities of living in a foreign country and help guide those who are looking to make that leap. In today's video, I sit down with a couple from Ontario, Canada, who decided that their country back home was no longer heading in a direction that they liked and wanted to take their chances in a new chapter here in Mexico. Unfortunately, Kyla was unable to make the conversation, but Jeff and I were still able to go fairly deep on a few topics. If moving abroad or relocating or living in a foreign country is something that you've ever considered, then you may enjoy this video. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so you and Kyla, you made the big move. This was almost 2 years ago. You leave Canada, you make the transition. I know your story and why. That's the biggest question everybody would want to know is not so much, okay, how did you do it or what did you do, but why? Why did you leave Canada at that time and make the big jump?
So I probably starts actually back in 2015, 2016. I was a stockbroker for TD Ameritrade. And I was beginning to sort of see the writing on the wall for some of the financials things were happening, some extended low interest rates, all those things. So I'd started just to become really jaded with the financial system. And what happened was Kyle and I decided to sell everything, renovate a school bus, and move basically across the country to Vancouver for a little while, and then try to move down to Belize was the original plan. So we ended up doing that, renovated a school bus, went across Canada, and then did the whole thing. But the main driver was this economy and sort of Canadian way of living isn't sustainable anymore. That was my thought process. So ended up living in Vancouver for 6 years before we decided to move down to Mexico, but it had to do with the kids and them wanting to finish school and all those things. But basically the trajectory for us was we were going to move south anyway. And the main driver was the whole unsustainability of the financial system of Canada, also wanting to be someplace warm, do all of those things. So when COVID hit, though, we kind of were like, this is the final piece of why this economy doesn't work. All of the controls that the government put in, all those things. And we're like, well, this is the only way to sustain that type of economy is by full control on the government's part. So we looked around and we were like, well, where can we go where we feel like we're safe to move our money, move ourselves, someplace that's warm we wanted to be, someplace cheaper to live, so that we wouldn't have to be beholden to the Canadian financial system, which essentially is built on debt, which if you've got a lot of debt, then you are double income and tied to the tax system, all those things. So that's basically the reason. That was the big driver for us to move. We were like, well, we had this idea in the first place. We were pretty transient already because we'd already sold everything prior to 2016. And then when COVID hit, it was pretty easy for us to just clear house, do the same thing, get rid of all the stuff we acquired in Vancouver, and then we decided to move south. But the plan was still to get someplace where we felt like there was a bit more freedom.
Where were you guys living before all of this, like prior 2016?
London, Ontario. We really wanted to get out of there, and we wanted to see a bunch of things, show the kids different parts of the country, do some traveling. We're both travelers, so that was natural for us. Actually, when my dad I found out that I was eligible for my Mexican citizenship through my dad because he was born there. That was another driver for moving to Mexico itself.
But back then, 2016, when you first envisioned retiring at some point and making a move, starting the movement south, you weren't empty nesters then. You had the 2 boys with you during that whole time. Was there a thought then of bringing them here at their age? Or you're like, no, I want to wait till they're independent and on their own? Well,
originally I thought I wanted to build like an eco village in Belize, and it could have been Mexico, could have been anywhere. So I just thought, take the kids out of school, because the schooling system was, well, our youngest had some issues with schooling. It would have been really cool if we could have homeschooled them. But it turned out the way my income worked, I have I'm a contractor, so I can build anywhere. I have a wide range of skills. So for me, income's pretty easy. But for Kyla, she'd been at home and ran her own business for so long in London. Just for her to start from scratch and actually earn some income was hard. And she just felt like she wasn't capable of homeschooling. So when we got to Vancouver, it just ended up being that it was too difficult to do the transition when the boys were 14 and 16.
Yeah.
So like they were really, a friend dependent as opposed to parent dependent. If we'd have tried it when they were younger, we probably would have been a little bit more, would probably been more successful. Had it to do over again, I would definitely done it earlier. Would have done it when the kids were independent, like in that they're not, toddlers, but between 5 and 10 would have been probably a better age based on what I know now. And then I think it would have been naturally more family binding. Whereas now the kids are both kids are in Canada and we're not.
When you talk about kids and leaving, there's some families here that have teenagers, and that's a whole other can of worms of talking about traveling with kids. That's a whole other factor. Ours and the toddlers, they're just attached to you.
Yeah.
They just go with mom and dad, but when you got teenagers who have a life and a say and a strong
independent thought. Yeah.
Their own thought. Yeah. It's like, I don't want to go to Mexico. I'll go for a 1 week trip, but I'm not living there,
Yeah. Yeah.
And even you and Kyla, like sometimes with even parents, it's not always 50-50. They don't both agree exactly the same. One wants it a little bit more than the other, and one's convincing. That you and Kyla were both like, nope, this is happening.
Yeah, it was really like, because of the way COVID kind of really focused you on what it was that you wanted. I think a lot of people decided that being compliant, staying at home, doing all the things that the government wanted them to do was fine. For me, that's never been okay. And then during the first 6 months of COVID, I was actually in California trying to start another business, but COVID kind of killed that too. But during that time, Kyla was really doing a lot of research on what was happening in the world, why was all this stuff happening especially in the Canadian government, those types of things. And then by the time we got back, she was like, we got to get out of here. And I was like, it's time. So we basically made a transition plan to transition over the course of the next 8 months. And then by the time November of 2021 rolled around, that was it, that we basically said, it's time to go. And and the big push was unvaccinated people just couldn't get on a plane after November 1st, 2021. So then we basically said, well, we better get on a plane and go.
We had done the same thing 2020. It was like that 11th hour. We thought that whole thing was going to come then, because there was a big rush of people coming in down to Mexico 2021. And when they met us and we got to know them, they're like, you've already been here a year? And we're like, well, all the things that you think right now are happening or did happen, we thought were going to happen then. And like you guys, you're already transient, so it wasn't as hard, where a lot of people had to tie loose ends up, sell a home, sell stuff, store stuff. And this is the first time they've ever done something like this, So Belize was on the radar. Mexico was, like you said about your father, because he was born here. So what steered you Mexico at the final moment?
It was just ease. Like getting to Belize was harder when the restrictions were on. We just found the cheapest flight and just happened to be Puerto Vallarta. And Kyla found a cool spot on Lázaro Cárdenas in Bucerias and stayed there for 2 weeks just to chill out. By the time we'd kind of done those 2 weeks, we're like, yep, this is a pretty cool spot. So that's why we ended up there.
So Puerto Vallarta, you didn't know anybody here? Just a destination? It was a direct flight?
It was like $200 to fly like one way.
Yeah.
And we was like, took whatever we could and that we knew we could handle for 2 weeks. And then basically we knew we were going to be at least 2 weeks. And then after we were like after a week, we're like, yep, we can stay here. And so we started looking for a permanent place to live. And we ended up bouncing around a little bit at a couple of different places, but we stayed in Bucerias ever since.
Cancun wasn't an option?
We didn't feel like we liked it because it was warm, but it was very touristy, and we're not tourists. We wanted to live there. So we on purpose didn't pick Puerto Vallarta as well. We wanted to do something that was a little off the beaten path, not as touristy. Turns out Bucerias is pretty touristy, but it has a really good blend of of expats and locals, I think. So
because that's always like the two sides of Mexico. Where do you go? And I remember reading a couple blogs, and the one deciding factor for us, other than we did know a family here, was this side, the West Coast versus the Cancun side, is if you're going to live long term, it's a more livable location versus the Yucatan side or Quintana Roo side that's more commercialized or more vacation spot. I can't say that from experience. This is just what we read in a lot of blogs. So that was the same decision too. So
yeah, we felt so too. But then when we went to get our the nasal test or whatever when we were in Vernon,
PCR.
and yeah, PCR test when we were getting when we were just about to get on the plane, and we met a whole bunch of people doing the exact same thing. Like the plane was full of us. We were all
Canadians.
yeah, a bunch of Canadians, but there was a bunch of people that were actually going to the East Coast as well. And so they like, oh no, we've got a great community over here, and they know the spots. And anyway, those are people who had already been there,
right?
And so had already, kind of made the transition, probably same as you, like done it early.
Yeah.
But they were kind of traveling back and forth before the restrictions kind of really kicked in. And so we met a bunch of people that were on the East Coast as well. So we made it was pretty arbitrary for us.
When you met those people where you're like, oh, good, we're not the only ones doing this.
Oh, totally.
We're all
Totally.
seeking asylum together.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we found is that the COVID sort of time gave us was this connectedness to people who really valued freedom. And I think those are the people where we just gravitated to. And when we got to Busteria, it's the same. We just end up having really good conversations with those people who are like-minded with us. And it's not that I don't have any ill will towards people who don't think the same way as me, but it's a lot easier to have a conversation when you're starting from the same basis, right? So
I get that. That's a question I have later on too, but I'll just touch on it now with you. For someone coming down here, is that available to them? Is there a lot of people like integrating was easy?
Yeah, I would say that it was easy for us. I'm a pretty social person anyway, and Kyla's really got a infectious attractiveness to her too. Like people just like us, like in the way that we interact with other people. I think if you're quiet and to yourself, you're going to find that everywhere you go, it's going to be difficult to find people that are like you. But if you reach out and make yourself available to people, it happens wherever you go. But I would say that Mexico was as friendly a place as we've been. COVID was a unique time. And so when you found other people who were thinking the same way as you and moving there for the same reasons, the connections are easy. Because it's really stark. Like the difference between you and somebody who doesn't believe that is it at the time was really there was a big
it was like non-negotiable. It was just like we cannot
communicate. Yeah, right. And I think it's softened a bit since, but I think if you dig deep down into what people actually believe and you start to go to the core of those beliefs, then I think those that connection becomes stronger. The Mexican people though were not, I would say it wasn't as easy to connect with the Mexican people, locals. But the expats that moved there, it was easy to create community. Locals are I mean, I think it's always going to be difficult because we're moving into their territory kind of thing. And I think that it takes a long time for them to trust that you're not there to destroy their culture. You're there to enjoy it, take part, and integrate, as opposed to trying to change it to the Canadian style, which I think a lot of people do. A lot of people do come in and go, I want it to be like Canada. And that to me is the wrong approach. But
do you think where we are, like we're in a pretty touristy spot, we're just another tourist in a sense, is like how they kind of see it? Like it's nothing.
Well, I think so. I think
vacationer coming down and it's like a dollar sign, or they're looking to spend money, or like it but then they realize, oh, you live here, you're part of the community. It's like a different feel now.
Well, I think it's like anything, like even in Canada, when we had immigrants moving in, and you go to certain pockets where they don't speak English, and you go, it would really be nice if you come into our country and you at least attempt to make the language. Yeah. Well, I think that's the big thing, is being able to communicate. Is if we as Canadians don't make an attempt to communicate with them in their language, then we're gonna have a really difficult time connecting with them. And so for me, I didn't know any Spanish before I got here, and I'm intent on learning, but I'm old, so it takes me a minute.
I know.
So
I've been here 2.5 years. I'm still disappointed in my Spanish. When we first moved, we lived in a gated community, and you just with other foreigners, so you're not pushed into this situation where you have to really learn. There's gardeners there and stuff and staff, and you make your efforts, and that's like probably like Kyla and Jazz. Blah, 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 blah.
yeah.
They're talking away and they're out there, and I'm just kind of sipping my coffee and nod. But now we live in a village, so or if I want to talk to the neighbors, I have to you gotta
Attempt
learn,
some Spanish. Yeah.
yeah, and it's great, and the kids get it better, and that
Yeah.
immersion is what really for sure works. Okay, so you and Kyla coming down here, the
Mhm.
transition here, was it harder than you imagined, easier than you imagined?
I don't. So I was so busy
Yeah.
before we moved, like just trying to get all of the stuff done, and so was Kyle, I think. And we were both just working on our stuff, getting things organized, getting things done, and we don't really think about it because the motivation was, let's do this as fast as we can because that was the push from
Mhm.
COVID. That being said, when we got there, definitely the transition was harder in some ways. Like you think about making the language transition, which is not hard in Mexico because there's so many English speaking Mexicans, but it's a very different culturally. I'm pretty conscious, and so is Kyla, about making sure that we're not overstepping our culture onto theirs.
Mhm.
So we're really conscious about that, making sure like, hey, like what is it if something that we're doing, offensive or some other thing because we're Canadians and we don't know it, then we got to learn that that's on us, right? So I think part of that is really learning that. And then also, there are some things that just aren't compromisable, like I need my sleep. So if somebody's blasting the music at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to say something, but that's what they do there.
Yeah.
And so I've had some altercations like that where I'm like, look at, that's enough.
Mhm.
But most of the time I'm like, oh, all right, that's your deal. That's your jam. Like, awesome. But yeah, definitely the cultural difference. It's subtle in Mexico because you're not faced with it every day when you're in a tourist community. But when you do go into your village or whatever, there's definitely some cultural differences, right? So you're definitely
Yeah.
in a spot where you get to experience some of that firsthand.
I remember hearing this saying before, and it was like a foreign country is not meant to make you feel comfortable. It's meant to make its own people feel comfortable. And it's like,
Yeah,
and when it makes you think about that for a sec, because you come down, you're like, well, this isn't like this, and this isn't the same, and I don't like
yeah,
this. It's like, well, that's why you're not supposed to be here, maybe. And I always find too in interactions, it's like I try to ask, this is how we do it in Canada, but how do you do it here? A transactional thing with money, or just certain ways of life.
yeah,
Doesn't give you a receipt for something. I'm like, okay, well, I'm used to getting a receipt, but you don't have that. So he's like, no, we don't do that here. Oh, okay. Then I've got
yeah,
to adjust, or I'm gonna
yeah.
get
Figure out
very
another way.
frustrated quick.
I find
Um,
that you do that much better than I do in terms of being able to, because you've traveled maybe more than I have, where you start to work on those, where you ask those questions, but you're a better question asker than I
Hence why I'm interviewing you.
am. That's right.
I want to ask you this, what your thoughts on this are, is like sometimes people are baffled that
Mhm.
Canadians, Americans, wherever Australia, who are coming to these countries to want to live, because it's not just retirees. It's not just I'm done work now and I'm gonna
Yeah.
go pop myself on a beach and have a margarita. Like this is changing. It's happening earlier with families. And what do you think that is, or why is that?
Most of it is you don't know what you don't know. And so we live in a world where it's a highlight reel everywhere we go in terms of what we see, but the responsibilities are never highlighted, right? So part of the give and take in Canada is, yep, it's beautiful, high education, good income, taxation is high. Everything you do is controlled and monitored. And so when you understand that that's what the cost of living there is, you get to choose. For me, I knew what the cost was in Canada, and the cost was too high.
Yeah.
So I think everyone has this perception of another place being, the location is the solution. And I think that's okay. I think that people changing things up is a good thing. I think, and it also exposes us, travel exposes us to all these um, things about ourselves that are arrogance, this idea that this hubris that our way of doing things is the best way to do things.
Yeah.
And I think if you expose yourself to something that's different, that's good, and the exposure is that lack of knowledge, right? I don't know. I have no idea what it's like to live here. What I do know is I'm done with where I am at right now, and I want to grow into something else. So I think it's this constant need for humans to grow. It doesn't matter where you live. When you see another space that you go, okay, that feels like a vacuum for me, where I can just go flow into and expand myself. And I think every time you travel, you grow into a new space and you understand something new about yourself. And that's what travel is about, is this idea that you're humble enough to get to another space, learn a new thing, learn another culture, all of those things. And I think it's got really, it's got nothing to do better or worse. It's just something you don't know. There's just unknowns out there that you want to explore. And I think that's where that travel thing is, going from one country to the next. I think this idea that our country is better than another country or first world or whatever is such a crock, because there's a give and take to everything. There's a cost to every single piece of our cultures. And so exploring those costs is part of learning to be humble in your own space.
No, so well said, man. 100%. Like the whole aspect of the humbleness of being like, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe there is another place. Just because I was born here, there was no choice in that transaction. I was born here and I'm just only allowed to live here and not have a desire to live anywhere else. That's absurd. There's 100, 200 countries other than Canada to live. And not that, like you said, not that it's bad or good, but something else might align more with what I like.
Yeah.
If it's simplicity.
Or at least you have the opportunity to grow it. Like that's the thing, is like, if you stay in the same place, you don't have the opportunities to grow yourself.
Right.
You're always going to fit in the container you're in. And so I feel like new containers just make for better people. Like we learn to love in different ways to the people that are around us. We learn to know ourselves better. What is it we like and don't like? And I think all of that is the betterment of humanity. We get to the space where we start to understand that different people, different cultures, different everything just makes us a little easier to deal with on a day-to-day basis, because we just start to expose ourselves to different things, and there's no shock value. There's none of this prejudice that we build into our lives, because we understand that other people do things differently, and that's okay. I mean, it's great. I mean, this variety is amazing. That's the beauty of the human experience. So I think that travel really I think is one of the best promoters of loving your people.
Yeah, the more shoes that you can walk in, the further you're going to go, for sure. Do you think there's a sense of almost a programming that comes onto us? Like, we're just, because we're from these countries, that it is the best. We're told it's the best. We're told that our whole life. It's the best education, the best healthcare, the best the best opportunity for your kid. Not that they're not good opportunities, and I'm still a proud Canadian, but that we just have this strong belief that anything else is not as good, and we'll constantly compare.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the natural bent to government, is that they're going to try and sell their country in a way so that the taxation becomes justified. I think that's the natural propaganda direction, is always going to be that way. And I think as humans, we just have to realize that we have this innate capacity to adjust, adapt better than any other species on the earth. We have this ability to adapt really quickly. The biggest inhibitor to that is our own minds. And that's where, we start to think that we're better, or think that our experience is better, or whatever, which is the biggest, crock of shit. But also it stops you from learning.
Right.
And it stops you from being. And I look at myself and the opportunities, and I think you too, opportunities have been given because of your openness to new experience. That's, and people ask me why why do I do this? I'm like, well, how can I not? I have a wide range of experience, wide range of tolerances, let's say, for other experiences. So when I approach a new space, like jumping into a new space is just easy for me now. It's natural for me. because I just I don't have to worry about whether or not I'm going to be okay, because I know I'm going to be, because I've experienced it already. And so I think that's where, this overall anxiety of North American culture, especially, I would say, comes from that idea that traveling, is somehow this built with angst and fear. I think when people experience, and everybody to talk to that has ever experienced it, and said it's the complete opposite. It frees you. It frees you from that anxiety, because you just learn that that all those things you feared don't actually exist.
Yeah.
And if they do exist, so be it. It's not the end of the world,
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the beauties of your podcast. What you're doing is you're exposing people, even in just a small way, to that experience, and I think there's huge value in that. And I hope that everybody that watches your podcast learns that the travel is how you become the best part of yourself.
Yeah. So for you and Kyla, like coming here, and it's a big learning curve, even though it's not that far, proximity is close. It's two different worlds. But I know a question that just over the years of traveling, people would ask is what's like something you've learned? They always probably thinking for an answer, like, what did you learn about a new place? But it's more what you learn about your old place. It's like when you remove yourself from something, you see it differently. It's the fear. It's the biggest thing I've realized is the fear that we live in of anything other than what we know. And that's it. It's unknown. It's like everyone's like, you took your kids to Thailand? You took your kids to Vietnam? You went to this country? You did that? And we haven't even gone to that exotic of places. There's other families that have done much more. But it's a real fear-based life that it's like we're all being shoved stuff thrown at us or programmed to think this way. And it's like, it's not scary at all. It really isn't. Everything you've been told is mainly not true. And come see it for yourself. And
it's not like you have to be this thrill seeker to make that happen, because it's nothing to move to another country and just experience it for a bit, instead of just going to vacation and setting yourself up on the beach. I mean, there's tons of benefit to doing that too. But what I find most people do is they need a vacation from the vacation once they come back, and they still end up with this. They're still dealing with themselves in a way that's the exact same as it was when they left.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go and spend an extended period of time and you make an intentional effort to spend time with the people who are different from you, spend time in places that are different from what you're used to, you're going to expand yourself in a way that allows you even to experience your old country better than you did before. I think that's super huge.
There's like a difference between a trip and a journey. Like a trip is predictable, where a journey is unpredictable. You don't know. And then a transformation takes place there, that you take that back and you're like, okay, I have a clear vision of things now and what I want to implement in my life going forward. And for you guys coming here, now things have settled. It's not as restrictive back home. It's not the same it was as 2020. So do you kind of look at your situation and say, okay, do we go back?
I've been back and forth a lot to work. So for me, I was doing that anyway, and going back was always just part of the plan. I guess had the world really come down to a halt, screeched to a halt, everything stopped and actually stopped instead of just partly, we would have stayed and I would have figured it out. But because as long as there was still an option for me to go back and work, making money in Canada is definitely, and in the States, is just definitely easier in terms of being able to support it. So then I can support Kyla and myself by working, short contracts in Canada and the US. But for me to go back to Canada is not like, I don't see it as being a place to go back to live, but it's definitely a place that I can make money at. So
there's no desire to be back there?
Not really, no.
No.
I mean, there's very few things that I miss. I mean, I wish the kids had kind of made the transition, but I also know it's important for them to do that stuff on their own. I do miss Canadian weather when it's blistering hot in Buenos Aires and super humid. Vancouver is really nice and temperate, and it's as nice in Vancouver in the summer as it is in Mexico in the winter. So there's lots of things to love about Canada. feel like that's a place where we're going to spend a lot of time in. Yeah, and I think I really like how the Mexican economy is going. I think that it's going to eventually be quite a bit easier for us as expats to do business in Mexico, and I think it's becoming more technologically advanced. It's becoming a little bit more like a first world country, I guess. But I also still like how slow it goes in that way. So I'm a watcher of economic activity in the world, and I look at it and go, well, the speed at which Canada and the United States are moving towards this digital age and AI and all those things is not well thought out. And I think that the pace of how things move in Mexico is, maybe it's not intentional, but maybe it is, for it to go slow and for it to be a space where they just take a little bit longer to think about why things are the way they are, why the things need to change, and what needs to change, and how do we keep our humanity and culture within those changes. So I think it's cool how Mexico is slow.
Yeah, it benefits us in a sense. Like, would you say everything's still cash here? Cash is king, more or less?
Yeah, you can't walk around without. I mean, you can still, I guess, credit cards still work, but cash is the way to get a good deal for sure. I mean, I love that. I think that also distances ourselves a little bit from the hand of government, gives us a bit of freedom to make the choices that we want to make, as opposed to ones that we know are being watched by other people.
Houses, cars, everything's being purchased here, and
yeah.
I remember just a quick visit to Canada last year, only 6-7 months ago, and the amount of swipe, touch, scan stuff, it's like, we've only been gone for a year and a half, and I can't believe how digital we've gone, and whether there's a purpose for that or not, so yeah, it was like taking a step back in time coming down here, and it could be 3-5+ years before it catches up to what's happening in the West there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's good. I think we can, that delay, that gap in time allows us to learn about what it is that you want out of those systems, right?
Yeah.
I think those tools are inevitable, like AI and all those things are inevitable. We'll learn really quickly because of the speed of it, whether or not we're actually benefiting from it or not. And if you take a step back and look at it, not immerse yourself in that right away, and start to sit back and go, okay, what's actually happening there with an objective eye, because you've got a different experience in another country. And then you look at your own country and go, well, what's actually happening?
Right.
You can make a decision and go, well, I just assume not participate in that part of that activity, or I really like that, and that's what we want to change too. So I think that gap in time, that 3 to 5 years or whatever behind, minimum 3 to 5 years that Mexico is behind in those ways. And I think that because they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have telecommunications infrastructure that North America has, and all of those things, and that's a good thing. That gives people that gap in time to create culture around it, as opposed to just defaulting to that digital age.
Would it be difficult for people who would want to move down here, like yourself, to find work down here, to find like ways to make ends meet, unless they're a digital nomad? Or what advice you would give somebody who would want to move down here?
So my primary source of income was always physical labor, like construction or whatever, in Canada. I'm not competing on that level in Mexico. Can't do it. My expenses are too high,
right,
for that to be a case. I could, I suppose, conceivably reduce my expenses to something that would make me competitive in the construction world. It's so completely different from what I do. I would never try to compete as a construction person in Mexico. The advice I would give to people in Canada is to say, give yourself a window of time with a bit of cash to experience what it is that you think you can do in Mexico, and what it is that you're offering to the people of Mexico, and do they value that? Because if they don't, which they may not, there's a really good chance that they just don't value what you think you're offering. I think what you're doing in terms of offering travel experience to other people is awesome, because you've got this experience nobody else has, and it's also something that's pretty universal. People love that type of thing. If they can afford to travel, they will. A huge part of it is, what are you doing here? What's your purpose? And when you figure out what your purpose is, that'll translate well to the rest of humanity. But if you think that your job is your purpose, you think you're going to translate that directly over to some other country, I think you're wasting your time. Yeah,
Is brick and mortar style businesses still a thing? Like people coming down here and starting up bars, starting up hotels, motels, is it still as popular as it once was, or is it kind of?
I think all of that stuff is. I think those are, food is a universally translatable skill,
Yeah.
and beer,
Yeah.
all those things.
It'll never
Everybody.
die out. People are always going to want.
No, I think I think that's going to always be a thing. Whether or not you think you can make money is another thing, and probably a different, that's a different experience. I think there's a lot of health services that probably, and the beauty of Mexico actually is that holistic health is valued there.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things I think that is probably going to be more transitional than like to the locals and to expats, is that when you're looking at the health system where you come from in Canada is very much controlled by government regulated industry. And in Mexico, that's different. And so you have this opportunity to try alternative medicines, to try those things, which I think it's going to be a huge, huge business. I think that's one of the larger transitional pieces. I think where expats are going to have some value because it requires a little bit higher education in terms of knowing what those things can be, and an open mind to understand that the allopathic system is not be all and end all. Right. And Mexican people also already know that, so they just go with what works. They don't care whether they don't care whether the doctor told them to do this, but if this remedy works, they're using it.
Yeah.
And so, I don't care whether it costs $5 or $5,000, you're doing what works. Yeah. And I think that's the difference between, say, US and Canada. I would think probably that's one of the biggest growing industries, I would think, is that alternative medicine, and also just having an option with medicine. So if you want allopathic medicine, dentistry, those types of things, plastic surgery for crying out loud, you can do all those things in Mexico, and it's way cheaper, still safe, still having all the protections that you would in Canada, but it's a quarter of the price.
Like that's a huge industry, medical tourism. Yeah. People come from Canada as well, where we have supposedly the best system. You talk to a lot of people here who don't think that way.
Yeah.
Who just don't see it like that. They're like, and they come here, fly here for vacation. And what is it? Is it just wait times?
I think it's also the level of personal care. I think that there's, I think in Mexico, it is a business for them, and they're competing against a bunch of other people. And so it really is reflective of, like, you look at Canada, the doctor doesn't have to treat you like anything. There's no survey. You don't have an option to go to a different doctor. You don't have any other choice but to go to the doctor they give you. In Mexico, you're like, well, I'll go to the next doctor. And if he doesn't treat me well, then I go to the next doctor, and they know it. And so if they're not friendly, if they don't provide good service, if they don't do all those things, there's still a legal system that you can pursue somebody who does you wrong. Right. But it's not, there's a competitive system where somebody can say, he's a really bad doctor and I'm not going to go to him. Yeah. And that's, in Mexico, that's a thing. So
did you guys tap into healthcare here when you came?
No.
Did you get it? No.
Wait a second. We did. We went to a medicine doctor. So Kyla had a kidney stone episode. Went to see this guy in Puerto Vallarta. He's a 5th generation Incan healer. Within 10 minutes of him being there, she was fine, and he gave her a week's worth of remedies.
But just natural
stuff we did the research. We figured out what the products he was using, and he explained it all, and we had a really good consultation, and then he was like, this is what you need to do. Give it a shot. These are the things that are in it, and you can do the research yourself. It's not going to harm you. These are all the things you're doing. They're all natural products. And we did it. We talked to some people who had some other anecdotal, success. Yeah. And so we're like, okay, give it a shot. And it worked. So it wasn't free, not free healthcare. Guy had to be paid, which was like, okay, well, for me, he's spending the time, he's doing the work, pay him. I recommend that guy all the time. Because I think what he does produces results, at least for some things that we were looking for. So yeah, that's the healthcare we use.
That experience, just as an example, do you remember what it charged or what it cost you guys?
The whole experience might have been, I thought it was under 1,000 pesos. So whatever that is.
$75 Canadian now, 70, 80. The dollar?
something like that. Yeah, basically dissolved all of her kidney stones or gallstones or whatever they were. So no reoccurring experience. A painkiller that was natural that didn't destroy her gut. What this guy gave us was it dissolved. It was a black radish, is what it was, black radish tincture. And black radishes in general, will dissolve kidney stones. There's so much of this, I think, wisdom that we're missing out on in Canada because the allopathic system has hijacked our healthcare system. There's this wisdom that we've sort of, I don't know if it's white or whatever it is we've done, but basically the people who come in and said that regulatory bodies essentially have basically dismissed all the things that ancient wisdom has been proving for a couple thousand years.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, for whatever it was, 70 or $80, that's a $10,000 surgery in Canada. Yeah. So somebody's making 10 grand and it was an $80 solution. And then you start to understand that this wisdom that's there that we virtually ignored for the last 300 years in Canada and United States. Now you have to start to respect it because what we have is not a health system, it's a sick system.
Okay. Now, cost of living. This is the only country you guys have lived outside of Canada, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so compared to Canada, it's cheaper.
Yeah.
Like noticeably cheaper, or are you surprised that maybe it might be more expensive than you thought?
So I think that the options are cheaper. So I think you can live in Mexico for as expensive as you want. I think the difference is that you've got a choice to be cheaper. In Canada, you go to the grocery store, you've got a very limited amount of grocery stores you're capable of interacting with. Whereas in Bucerias, you go to one side of the highway and you pay X amount. You go to the other side of the highway and it's a heck of a lot less. Now, you're not going to get, shiny, pretty apples, but you're going to get local produce that you can live on. That's cheaper. And I think if you're willing to, because if you look at it logically, that there are Mexican people there and their wage is, let's say it's 500 pesos a day.
Maybe
500 pesos a day is, $30. They're operating their entire lives on that amount of money. And so it's possible to do. How they're doing it is what you have to figure out. You can go to the tourist side and pay the same amount of money for going out for dinner as you do in Canada. You get to buy a steak, and it'll cost you $50. I guess the thing is that you've got the ability to live. We have an apartment, for instance. We have an apartment where we pay $500 a month for. In Canada, I just can't find that apartment. I can't find a 400 square foot or 500 square foot apartment that I'll pay $600 a month for. It just doesn't exist. So the ability to do that on the Mexican side of the highway in Bucerias makes it a lot easier for us to do that. So I think that the cost of living is kind of this. It's a funny number because we're not comparing apples to apples ever, unless you are. Yeah, it is, because if you're wanting the same services you're getting in Canada, you're going to pay the same price.
Yeah.
But you have the option to not. I think that's where the cost of living can drop, is where you're saying, okay, I'm willing to live like a local.
Right.
I'm willing to go without some of the niceties. Like I don't have hot water, for instance, in one of my apartments. I don't have hot water. It doesn't exist. Do I need it? Nope.
I don't remember the last time I turned the hot water on for a shower here.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's just things that you go without. And that's how you decrease your cost of living, is you let go of the idea that you need all these things, these niceties from Canada. You don't.
That's the adaptability that is so crucial, I think. And I think about this, I want to go off topic, but with my kids, it's just like, is if you can learn that adaptability in life and going with rolling with the punch, it's so crucial.
It's more about a mentality. Cost of living is about a mentality. So for me, the last 8 years since I quit being a stockbroker, I basically only work when I want to. What that requires of me, though, is that I make sure that I don't spend money on things I don't need. So I don't put myself in debt. I don't buy things I don't have money for, all those things. And I go, okay, so I have to, if I want to live this lifestyle, I have to be able to operate on less. Right. And I changed my mentality prior to moving to Mexico. So even in Canada, I found the cheapest ways to do things, or I just went without. And I think that's where you have to, that's the mentality you have to have. If you think cost of living is a thing and you want to make that transition, it's not. It's already in your brain. You are either already discovering ways to do things on the cheap, or you're not. Your cost of living won't change. Not much, anyways. Not if you go to Mexico. You want to go to live in Puerto Vallarta or Nuevo or buy a place. You want something comfortable going on the beach. Yeah. You'll spend $1 million for a condo, and then your HOA fees and all those things, and you'll end up having costs of $150,000 cost of living every year.
Yeah.
That's just how it goes, if that's what you want.
I definitely notice, okay, from Canada, I don't know exact percentages, but I can compare to Southeast Asia, and it's definitely more expensive than Southeast Asia. But location is crucial as well. So yeah, we live in a touristy spot. If we live out in the mountains and the jungles, well, in the rural spots, you're going to pay a significant amount less. Most people's main cost is their rent or their mortgage. So that, if you do try to compare a lakefront condo versus a beachfront here, you would pay significantly less.
I don't think so. I look in Vancouver, for instance. If you want a place downtown Vancouver condo that's got ocean view, right, decent ocean view, you're probably spending $4,000 or $5,000 a month. Does it change a lot in Bucerias? Like, if you want a nice condo in Bucerias, do you pay $3,000 US a month? That's exactly the same.
Yeah, you can. There's some here.
And you can, right? The difference is, in Canada, if you move 3 blocks off of that condo, you're still spending $3,000 a month. But in Mexico, if you move 3 blocks back off the beach, now you're significantly less, right? So I think it's that gradient from super high to super low. In Canada, it's like this, but in Mexico, it's like you drop so high, but then the amenities drop too. Like the condo you're buying 3 blocks off the beach in Vancouver is almost exactly the same as the condo you're buying on the beach in Vancouver. But the one in Mexico is, you go from pristine hot water, all the amenities, you go to, a cot and no hot water and white walls. It's so starkly different. And I think that's the biggest difference is options. Cheaper options are available in Mexico, whereas they're not in Canada. I mean, you can go to a cardboard box, but that's about it.
Okay, a big conversation that comes up always. Let me see if you get this. What do you think is the number one asked question about Mexico? Did you hear everything I asked?
Yes. Is it, you asked what's the most asked question?
Yeah.
About safety, maybe? Is it safety? Yeah.
Exactly. What do you think about safety? Is Mexico safe?
It's as safe as anywhere I've ever been, as far as I'm concerned. Like, there's bad people everywhere, but there's good people too. I think you find your tribe, you find your safety in the people that you surround yourself with. I think if you are going to wander into a space where you're either unknown or you're exposing yourself to people who might be bad, I think you'll have a difficult time. So I had a motorcycle stolen when I was there, but I've also had a motorcycle attempt to be stolen in Canada. There may be a bit of a more secretive underbelly in Mexico, like with the cartels and those types of things. But the thing is, it's all people. We're all just people. And I don't feel like the lack of safety is any different than it is in Canada. We just, to be honest, we ignore the lack of safety, or the lack of, safety basically, in Canada. And if you look at Surrey, BC, and the shootings that happened there, you go to Ottawa, Toronto, if you go to any big city and you hang around with a round crowd, you're going to be in trouble. Same thing that happens in Cancun, same thing that happens in Mazatlan or Puerto Vallarta. You're going to hear about bad things happening to people. To me, it's kind of that is just the way things are. And if you're not going to act consciously and you're going to be put yourself in a place where you're vulnerable, I think you may end up in trouble. But I don't think that there's necessarily a safety issue in Mexico that's exclusive to Mexico. I think everywhere you go, if you find yourself in the wrong crowd, you're going to be in trouble. That being said, I don't think that the police in Mexico are necessarily going to be super helpful. I don't expect the police to be helpful in Canada either. I think there's this idea that we pay these taxes for the police to protect us in Canada, and that's what makes us more safe. But I actually think I've experienced bad things from the police in Canada, and to be honest, I've never experienced a bad thing from a cop in Mexico. They're just people. I mean, but what's a bribe? Like, I got bribed I had to bribe a couple of times because they caught me doing something I wasn't supposed to do. And so I was like, well, sorry, but can I feed your kids for a minute? And for me, I like that system. It's not some legal entity that's telling me what I can and can't do. It's a human being who's taking me at face value where I'm at right now and interacting with me going, this is what we're supposed to do. And you didn't do that. So you need a little slap on the wrist. I'm like, okay, so let's talk this out. And so that to me is a really good experience. I think that's a great experience, but some people aren't comfortable with that. And I get it. They want to have these structures that government makes. Okay. Then probably Mexico's not for you because that's not what happens there. But for me, because I'm pretty open to those types of interactions, the safety experience has never been a thing. I drove all the way from Phoenix to Puerto Vallarta. That's a 24-hour drive. Never experienced anything bad. I also didn't drive at night. There are some things you should probably just not do. But make yourself aware of those things and then just look out for yourself. So I don't think safety's a huge issue there, to be honest.
It's a tough question because we base our opinions on like our own experiences. So you and I, we've had a couple little things happen, but nothing significant. Yeah. So it hasn't altered too much, but you talk to someone who has had a nasty experience somewhere and they're going to have a whole different story and have caused them to leave these countries and never step foot again, but then there's always a talk of like corruption, like, well, it's so corrupt there. And you, I don't know, do you say the same? I'm like, you don't think where we live is corrupt, hidden, or swept under the rug a little bit differently? It's just more open. You just see the corruption here versus it's hiding,
Well, it's just a different type. So you see it as being starkly different from what you're used to. Right. But I think that's the thing, is that's this hubris piece, right? Like this idea that we have a system that's so much better than anyone else's, as though we're not all human beings operating in the same capacity as we always do, and that we aren't all exactly the same, because we all are. We all do these things. We all have this weakness to want to better ourselves at the expense of someone else, and if we don't consciously object to that, then we're going to do it. And every single culture is the exact same way. And they have different ways of doing it, I suppose, but you cannot say that our countries are less corrupt than theirs. And I think that's where you just kind of have to realize that people are people. And the more, to me, the more you can interact face to face with someone, the less likely you are to have an interaction that's negative, because you're able to show the person who you are, your humanity, and they're able to show you theirs. Whereas if you've got these regulatory bodies that just makes blanket statement rules, everybody becomes a rule follower instead of a lover of people. Right. And all of these rules just make you arrogant enough to want to control someone else. And I think that's where safety and whatever else, corruption, it's all relative. It all happens. The rules don't stop people from doing those things. So no advice for anyone coming down here, just make yourself familiar with the culture. Get to know a local, because they're going to know what the rules are. And those unwritten rules about how you operate in a system where the rules are different. Just because it's not a written rule doesn't mean there isn't rules, right? About rules of operations. And so when you go into a country where you're going, okay, so I don't really know, is it okay for me to drive around and have a beer while I'm driving around? Well, turns out in Mexico, you can do that as long as you're not driving and drinking at the same time. So that's their rule. And you just know that because that's how it operates, right? A big thing with people is when they don't see our kids in car seats, or they're just flabbergasted, like, what? I mean, we have a car seat for Tennessee, of course, but I'm like, we've been in tuk-tuks. We've been on the back of scooters around the world. Like, it's not that, it's okay. It's okay. We put them in a seatbelt and so be it. But you see here, you got the whole family and the cousin and the neighbor's dog on a scooter, whipping along and sitting in the back of pickup trucks, and no big deal. That's what I mean. You'll learn the local rules. And the thing about Canada and the United States is it's so driven by money. I think this idea that these rules are there to protect us is not true. The rules are there to create income for somebody. It's better for whoever made that rule, but it's not better for us. If you were to say to somebody who might be moving here, would you tell them any step process, or like, come visit here first? I would say before you commit, I mean, if you've got the time, nothing, if shit isn't hitting the fan, everything's doing okay, and you've got the time, and you're going to be consciously making this move, my first thing would be get rid of everything you don't need. Really think hard about what it is you don't like, what's excessive in your life. Then I would say make a trip to a couple of different countries that are quite a bit different than the culture you live in now. Then figure out what it is you like about the things that you, or the things you miss, things that you really want in your life, and then take a long trip, take a month to go to a place you think you want to be. If you're going to make that sort of conscious decision, either that or jump in head first and just go. So that's, I mean, that would be,
you'll land. You'll
yeah,
land on your feet. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's the person I am, right? I just jump.
Mm-hmm.
I'll make it. I'm confident of that. I think I can just do it, and I will, and I always have. It's always worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I also know that the people aren't like that. Not everybody's like that. So if you're the type of person who really wants to plan it out, I would say get rid of everything you don't need and live that way for a while in the country you live in. You know, reduce everything down to the things you need, and then go. All right, where do I want to go? What do I love about? What do I think I would like about the world? And then I would make that transition from there.
I think that's it, man. That was a good convo. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, me too.
I super appreciate you doing this. I know you're a busy guy. You're getting busier now.
Yeah, that's okay.
Continuing on.
Yeah.
So I'll even though I'll end the video, I want to keep you on for a couple more minutes just to chat with you or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks again, Jeff, for doing this.
No problem. Well, thanks for you doing this. I appreciate you pushing this out there. I think it's awesome.
For sure. Anything to just get people motivated and see another story that's done something like this is, I think, always helpful. So, okay. Hopefully we'll have you on again. We'll do this again.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you.